because we have a busy agenda. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We appreciate you attending the advisory committee meetings. We are moving forward and trying to put together water trading programs and other projects that I think will interest you. And we're going to start today with our Basin Safe update. We have Four Creeks Data Management Group on the line. They have been working diligently with us to get the account up and running, and I think most of you on the line are familiar and have been looking at them. If you have not logged into your account, please do so, or if you have not received a letter from us regarding that, contact us and we will walk you through it and make sure your parcels are included. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh. Are you going to head it up today?
It'll be kind of a mix of myself and Victor and Dawn, but I'll let Dawn lead off with introductions on our end for those that haven't had the pleasure of meeting us.
Great.
Thanks, Deanna. So just some background. It's myself. I'm Don Tucker with Four Creeks, and then we have our lead programmers, Josh and Victor, with us that are going to give you guys an overview of the Basin Safe system and hopefully provide some insight on how it works and clear up any confusion there might be, and then also open up for some conversation along the lines of any questions you guys have. But some background on Basin Safe. So we've been implementing this in the Tule Subbasin for about 2 years now. Started with the Lower Tule and Pixley districts, and then proceeded to work with Eastern Tule GSA, and now we are working with Tri-County. And by far, Tri-County has been the smoothest process for us to get Basin Safe up and going. As far as the number of accounts you guys have has made it very nice on us, and it's been good to work with Deanna and Stacy. But yeah, I'll just hand it over to Josh to kind of give you guys an introduction to Basin Safe and an update, and then go from there.
So as Dawn said, while I get my screen sharing going, I guess my official job title is lead developer. Yeah, so I'm basically tasked with making sure that your guys' needs are met, from both the GSA and as best as we can from the landowner side of things. Yeah, go ahead, Victor. Right here.
Oh, I'm Victor. I'm another developer, kind of helping oversee the project, just make sure everything runs smoothly. So if you guys do have questions or any concerns about, the data, again, reach out to Deanna, Stacy, and that team, and they'll kind of, forward that back onto us, and we'll get that stuff situated for you guys. So we'll just hop straight into the demo.
Yeah, so just for the sake of privacy, we set up basically a demo system to kind of show you what you guys will end up seeing for the most part once we allocate in 2 days to your guys' accounts. So I'm going to try to keep this a little bit high level. So for those of you that have not logged in yet, this is what your dashboard will look like once you have water deposited into your accounts. And all these water types are generic, so none of what you see here will apply to you. Everything is very generic in this: water type 1, water type 2, what you started out the year with, any credits that you might have gotten for that particular allocation, any extraction or usage of that allocation, and the remaining balance. Scroll down here, and down here you can see your recent transactions, kind of like a really high level, this is what's happening on your account in, the past month or so. So currently you only see the initial deposits right here, the type, it's a credit, and the quantities over here.
So that would be the equivalent of like a bank statement, a monthly bank statement, which kind of just tracks, the movement of your water credits, any changes, any allocations, any transfers, things of those sort.
And as we continue scrolling, some of this stuff will be in flux. We are working with Deanna and Stacy to finalize this because you guys don't use ET as your final number for consumption. There is an extraction formula, and we are working on integrating that in so you can see the actual debited values from your account and not just the ET. And it will look something very similar to this. We're not gonna reinvent the wheel per se with how we show it. It'll just be a different context, groundwater extraction versus evapotranspiration.
And so on this chart, you'll see, Josh will probably jump into this in more detail, but it's going to track your monthly ET, or as he said, your groundwater extraction calculated value. And as he's walking through it, you can select or deselect certain parcels so you can kind of isolate different fields. Eventually, we would like to move into something that's more field-based so that as you're working with a certain crop that's managed differently than other crops, you can really look at how ET and consumption is happening on that particular field.
That is correct, yeah. And actually, that feature is actually probably done. So as I move through, they'll get to see where they can customize their APN names to something more identifiable to the landowners, you guys, something that you guys can recognize, because APN numbers is just the 9 digits. Who remembers those? I'll go over the editing of the profile real quick.
And to take a step back, when you're editing your profile, this is really the first thing that we want you guys to do if you have not accessed your account. So this is, we sent out mailers to each of you, or Deanna and the Tri-County staff have, and gives you a temporary login password and username. And then so the first thing that you'll be asked to do is to update this information and to keep it updated so that we can continue to stay in contact with you if we have issues with your accounts. It just really helps keep the communication line open throughout the entire time this software is being implemented.
Yeah, and to further add to what Don said, from our perspective, what you put in here is how we contact you. So, you know, if your address changes, it's very important that you notify Tri-County or log in and update your information yourself, so that way your statements, your notices go to the correct address, and that way you're informed, you know, at all times what's happening on your account. Okay. Alternate contacts. If you have a individual, you know, that handles certain things like billing for you, you can designate those here. Oh, sorry, the screen share is a little bit lagging right now.
On this.
Yeah, there it goes. So from here, you can add distinct contacts for each different aspect of the system, whether it's your irrigator, you know, your farm manager, your bill recipient, your assessment contact, or the general contact. So we'll have multiple ways to get a hold of the right person within Basin Safe, depending on what the issue is. I'll cancel that for now. All right, now let's go to probably the biggest and most important aspect of Basin Safe, and that would be the water accounting. So the way we split it up is each water type acts as like its own independent bank account where you have checking, savings. This has built-in overdraft protection, so don't worry about that. But yeah, each distinct water will have its own different rule set behind it. I can't necessarily speak to the very specific rules of it. That'll be in the rules and regulations of the GSA. So for example, water type 1 might be total precipitation. Water type 2 might be your native sustainable yield. Water type 3 might be purchased credits. 4 might be transitional tier 1. Water type 5 will be your transitional tier 2 penalty. And you can see what happens on each one independently of the others. And Victor, can you do me a favor and administratively go ahead and make a debit on water type 1 underneath this account so they can get a better picture of how that looks?
Yep.
So we'll wait for a few seconds while Victor adds a debit to this account.
Not running right now, but give me a second. You can go to the parcels tab and we can come back.
Okay. So this right here is an inventory of your APNs within your accounts. It does look like oh, it is here. So as I was talking about before, where you can give your APN a name that you recognize. So this just gives another way for the staff to identify your property. So if you call in, don't know your account number, don't know an APN number, but you did come in here and update your field or ranch names, you can say, oh, yeah, block 1, my walnuts or whatever. That'll provide them a list of options where block 1 actually appears in the field or ranch name. So a little bit more flexibility on that. Yeah, pretty basic. Down here below the parcel list, you can see a history of your account, parcels that have been leased to the account, parcels that have been leased away from the account, parcels that you've acquired over time will show up in here. So there'll be a list of, hey, on this date, I had this APN transferred into my account, and on this date, I leased this APN to another person within Tri-County. Any questions so far on, from the landowner perspective, you don't really have much to manage on the APN side of things. And down here, I believe, yes, right here, your water allocations for each APN and the crop associated with that APN. And this kind of leads into that extraction formula that I was talking about earlier on the dashboard, how we're going to replace or make the ET a secondary component versus what we're actually deducting from your accounts. And you'll be able to view that here, anytime you choose. And if there's an issue with it, you can contact Tri-County and they'll come in here and fix your crop for you. And just a little bit of context behind that, we are pulling in your crop information from a snapshot at the end of, I believe, 2018 from LandIQ. So that was about 3 years ago. So I'm sure there might need to be some tweaks made to that. So that way we're deducting the correct amounts from your accounts. Yeah, but that is a easy correction on the Tri-County side of things administratively. And yeah, is that debit coming?
Yep, debit's good.
Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. So that is more of a mere question probably at this point than a me question. I can answer the specifics of like how that's going to look, and I'm going to swap over to the water accounting tab. And then you can kind of see how the debit that Victor just put in, he put it in administratively, so the source is admin. The type is a debit, and here's the amount that we debited from the account. Now, when we actually start using the extraction formula, you'll see transaction source will say system, or will it say system, Victor?
Probably just say extraction.
Extraction. So the transaction source will say extraction, the type will be a debit, and you'll see the amount. Just like that. And go ahead and add an adjustment to it as well, so that way they can kind of get the full picture of the different transaction types that can be administratively done.
And just to provide some more background on this, you'll typically see these transactions happen on a regular basis when ET or a calculated groundwater pumping value is done on a reoccurring time basis, or if you were to move water from one count to another and trade credits or anything like that, then that's when you would see deductions. Allocations would happen at the beginning of the water year based on your acreage, and so that's why it's important to have updated parcel information. And so if things do look correct in that previous tab that Josh was covering, that would be a good time to contact the admin staff and get those things corrected so that we're making sure that your allocations are correct and that also your irrigation efficiencies are being applied correct to calculate groundwater pumping from the ET, which is the source of consumption calculations in the system.
Yeah, and one thing I forgot to point out is right here is the transaction notes. So you'll be able to actually see some detailed information about what these debits and what these credits were outside of just, what initiated it and what type it was.
And then as you can see in the gray header above where Josh is at, this is the last 5 transactions that are displayed on this page. But if you go to the overview, the first tab that we looked, you'll get a full history of the transactions, but just to see recent activity, if you're looking for, waiting for an allocation to come in or a debit to see what it looks like for that month, then that's where you would land to kind of follow those a little bit more closely and get a bit more detail on the transaction type.
And we try to be as transparent as possible because I know this Sigma is very new as a whole, and there's probably not a ton of water accounting systems out there. So we used some standard examples like, I used Wells Fargo as an example. How do I look at my bank accounts? What information would I like to see for, a given year, So right here, you can see what you were initially deposited. This value never changes. Any credits that have been credited to your account will appear here. Your total debits, any adjustments that have been made, and the remaining balance of this particular allocation. Start date. I hope everyone can see this. I know the text can be a little bit small. An expiration date, when this allocation expires, and what this allocation is based on. Percentage, very quick, how much of this type of water do I have remaining versus the overview, which shows a global view of how much, in fact, on this particular account, the debits were so small, it didn't even move the percent bar. Is there any questions on kind of this view of the customer-facing side of things?
Okay.
I'm going to take that as a no.
It's a quiet group.
Yeah. Okay, so the ET tab, we kind of touched on this. We'll be supplementing this with the actual calculated extracted values. ET will become a secondary component of that and not the primary component. And we expect to have that done before we actually consume from your allocations. What we'll do is we'll display an estimate first. And there'll probably be a time period where I encourage you guys to log in after we allocate your accounts on Friday, to go in and see what we'll be pulling from your accounts. That way you're not caught off guard when we extract from your accounts and then send you a statement or an invoice. Sorry, Stacy and Deanna, if I'm using the wrong terminology. I don't want to panic anyone on here by saying the wrong verbiage. So if I'm miscommunicating your guys' intentions, please feel free to interrupt me.
That's okay. You're doing fine.
So right down here.
Maybe let's go over the different date ranges that you can view in the ET table just to kind of get.
Oh, the top of it right here.
Yeah, you can go from 20. You can click on 2020 or 2021.
Or both, yeah.
Chart, yeah.
So the way this chart works is by default, we'll always show the current calendar year. Sorry, what was that?
Background, obviously.
We're going to be adjusting this to reflect the water year. Instead of the January to December, it'll say October to September, I believe. Correct, Victor? It's October to, or is Stacy, October to September?
So there's two different things. The water year is what we're going to send the annual report information to the subbasin on, but our invoicing and our allocation year is not on the water year, it's on the calendar year. So it'd be January through
Okay.
December.
This is correct.
Okay, so this is correct for you guys. Okay, so this won't change. So you will see the January to December view. And then as we get more and more data, obviously, this is test information, so it's going to look a little bit funky, but as you select more and more years, the chart will actually start to grow to encompass those years. So as you add more years to this, you'll end up with more lines, or the chart will grow horizontally. So it'll be like January to December, then immediately you'll see another January to December.
Or you can also view parcels on the same time frame, January through December, overlaid on top of each other, so you can see, based on the types of years, how the fields performed as far as extractions.
Yeah, like that. So yeah, this is the same APN. You can see how the data ends, then picks back up again. And then down here we have the tabular view of it. And then we have the same functionality right here where you can view a specific year. Or the current year. With a export to Excel button for your guys' own records. So I will kind of show that real quick. Just like that. So you'll be able to dump the data outside of Basin Safe to keep for your own records. Nothing else on this page as of yet. Now this is probably the most important tab, probably for new users. We don't really like to put a ton of verbiage in it. People tend to skip over that, and it's like, yeah, just show me what I need to do. So we created some help videos, and we'll be tailor making these to, you know, each individual GSA to make sure that we're not showing you something that you guys don't actually have.
But yeah, so these videos basically they're pretty short, and they just kind of give you a quick little walkthrough of typical questions you might have, and so they're pretty helpful and resourceful, and so like Josh said, this is a very important part for beginning users, and then as time goes on and the system gets more sophisticated and there's more questions asked on certain topics, and we'll be continuing to update these to make sure that you guys have at least the basic resources to use so that you can operate your account.
Yep. So as we add like new things to it, like we might have a tab that says, how do I export ET? And it'll just kind of show you where we're clicking at inside of the system and doing less of trying to explain it and just show you guys how to do it. And that applies for a lot of, like how to use the ET reporting tools.
Yeah. So right now we have about 6 to 7 videos, but yeah.
7.
And none of them have sound. We're all visual learners here, so again, we like to see videos. Just get straight to the point. We don't like reading or listening, so we thought videos would be the most helpful there.
Yeah, and it's the easiest thing to iterate on as well, because we can easily capture the new view and not have to worry about, oh, we missed this piece of text that doesn't apply anymore and I'm giving you wrong information. This is probably the best medium to help you as the end users kind of get a general idea of how things go. We're also working on documentation, the text version of the documentation for those that are less video orientated and more reading orientated. Unfortunately, that is a lot more labor because things are in such flux. It's basically writing, you know, an essay for everything every time it changes. It's probably the best example I could give.
So that's a pretty brief overview of the system and how it operates. We are also working on creating an app version of it so that it can be used on mobile devices, testing it and determining the most important information to store on that. But that's still in the works, and you know, we'll also make sure we include help videos for that and take feedback from you guys as well as Tri-County staff to make sure that the information shown is the most useful for you while you're out in the field so that you can respond to any type of situation that may arise.
Okay,
I was
so
just getting ready to ask about the map function if you had it on this demo, and
yeah, the demo and
looking at that map function, there's still some the border of Tri-County is going to be added, and I think there's some parcels that actually aren't in Tri-County on that map right now, so we're working to correct all of that. But you, in your individual accounts, you'll be able to go in and go to your parcel, which if you're anything like me, I appreciate the map function. It's very helpful.
So yeah, when you log into your account, unfortunately, I don't feel comfortable actually pulling up a real person's account, but this is the GSA kind of wide overview map. But let's say, for example, one person owns this entire section of land up here. When on your guys' specific account, I know in our demo, we were trying to fit it in. Sorry, the Zoom controls are popping up over my Chrome tab. Right here, the map tab will be in between the ET and extraction tab and the help tab.
And you guys have all of you have access to that right now. So if you guys did log in, you will be able to see it. Just with our demo account, they're all fake APNs, so we don't have any geometry on those guys.
Actually, I do feel comfortable showing the BLM account because basically they're paid for with tax dollars. So I'm fully comfortable sharing something from the government.
With the
So
caveat that I believe some of those parcels may not be in Tri-County. I think this was the BLM's full list. And
I probably imported it in full, yeah.
So we have some cleanup work to do there.
So in this case, this would be the customer-specific view. You only see what's assigned to your account. And for kind of a more complete picture of some of the other things that we have, I'll show you how busy the ET tab can get. This is a kind of a quick, oh, this one's broken. They have so many APNs, our chart doesn't work. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, we've never seen this before. Like, yeah, so this is the first time.
Writing code, not us.
Right,
Yep.
right.
Yeah, I have actually never seen this scenario where there were so many APNs in an account that the chart ceases to work. So that's a good thing I brought this up, because if we have another person, one of you landowners, go in and be like, I can't see my chart. I caught it today during the meeting, and you didn't have to call Stacy or Deanna.
Back to the drawing board.
Yep. Yeah, visual components are always really hard to do depending on how much data you have to cram in them. Yeah, in this case, it completely fell apart, but the table still works. And you can kind of see, you know, the values that the person representing the BLM account will see. So, and kind of going over some things that you'll see in the future, you'll see a water transfer history. Obviously, your accounts haven't been allocated, so this tab just doesn't appear. These don't apply to you at all. These will be removed from your guys' side of things. Wells and meters also doesn't apply. Turnouts doesn't apply. But the vast majority of what is here, other than those tabs that I mentioned, will be fully functional starting April 30th. It reminded me, Victor, to make sure that these are not getting re-enabled on Tri-County. Okay. The water deliveries, the turnouts, and the wells and meters.
I think it's just a permissions.
It is a permissions issue, yeah.
I think that's pretty much it for as far as the demo goes, right?
Yeah, as far as the demo goes, yeah.
Yeah, so now that you guys seen the full demo, open it up one more time for questions and any comments that you guys have, things that you would like to see that are on there, ideas on potentially an app-based, would be great feedback for us to get. Okay, well, thank you guys. Again, if there's any questions, we work with Deanna and Stacy on a regular basis, so we stay in contact and try and stay on top of those things, and so that's a good place to go to as we deploy the system and you guys log on and start using it. The best way to get a hold of us is through them. So thank you guys.
Thank you, and it's been a pleasure working through this with you guys. You're very helpful, and I appreciate it, and responsive, and I'm looking forward to getting the system up and running for everybody.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then like I said, I encourage you, sometime on April 30th, if you haven't already, hop into your accounts and you'll see the water allocated to you. And then there'll be, I don't know if Stacy has communicated this yet or Deanna. I might be jumping ahead and it might be further in the agenda, but your welcome letters should have the timelines that were set on when your accounts are being allocated, when we're pulling out the extraction, yeah. Sorry, my verbiage. I keep on saying, I keep on thinking ET in consumptive use, but it's actually extraction. And yeah.
Just for everybody online, I'll go through those. So in the 1st of May, we're going to credit the account.
Oh, 1st of May. Sorry about that. I've been saying the 30th.
Yeah, and then so we're getting close. Mid-May, we're going to then debit the account for the use January to current for this year. And then it would be the first week of June, we intend to send out the invoicing for the first quarter of the year. So there will be, a couple weeks there where you can see what your credit is, and if there's any, if you see any irregularities, you can contact us and we'll try to get that fixed. And then on the 15th, you'll be able to see, or somewhere, I'm not sure what day the 15th falls on, but somewhere there you'll be able to see the debiting from your account. And again, that gives us a couple weeks to look at or fix any problems that you may see with the debiting from your account. And then again, June 1, we're going to be sending out the invoices for the first quarter. Are there any of the landowners have any questions on the account, the accounting, and what they might see? All right, then. Great. Thank you so much, guys. And I guess we'll be on our regular update tomorrow at 3.
Yep. Perfect.
All right, we're going to hop off now, but it was a pleasure, and talk to you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That.
And just so everybody knows, we are recording this for record, and you can always access these recordings on the website if you would like to go back and listen to anything that we addressed during the meeting. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Amir.
I gotta follow that presentation from Four Creeks. Mine's not going to be nearly as interesting, but I do want to talk a little bit, give you guys some updates on a few items to the group. First and foremost, on the Tule subbasin as a whole, one of the issues that we had outstanding was the Prop 68 grant. And I think many of you probably remember last time I mentioned the fact that we had not been awarded the grant, and we were appealing that decision with the department. Unfortunately, the appeal was not successful at either Tule or the Tulare Lake subbasin. But both projects certainly, are viable options for the round 2 for Prop 68, and we are looking at pursuing that, as well as the department has mentioned that there may be some additional funds made available completely outside of the Prop 68 process for, for the highly overdrafted basin. So wanted to at least bring everybody up to speed on that and let you know. And if you have any questions, please stop me. I'm going to go through some of these informational items fairly quickly because we still have a lot to cover in today's meeting. And we might not be able to get to all of it. So let me know that. The other item I wanted to update the group on was the annual reports. Both the Tulare Lake and the Tule Subbasin reports were submitted on April 1st. The Tulare Lake report, nothing out of the ordinary for that particular report. It's available for anyone to review on the Signal portal. There was some, we talked about groundwater flow directions and how much groundwater has decreased a bit. The change in storage in Tulare Lake was around 30,000 acre feet, which is in line with what we've seen in previous years. The Tule Subbasin report for Tri-County, it does have some data in there that we feel was probably or is inaccurate, and there's going to be a Tule Basin meeting tomorrow with the managers, and we're deciding how we're going to respond to some of these concerns that the managers have. The data in there shows a significant change in storage difference between this year and last year for Tri-County, and it does that, by the way, for the entire Tule Subbasin. We feel that some of that data was based on some questionable readings in some of the wells on the water levels, and while it may be mathematically correct, doesn't actually represent what's going on across the entire subbasin. Getting down to Tri-County in particular, there were some wells that were not monitored, and we are working closely with Four Creeks to ensure that that's been addressed, so that we have good data moving forward. And I think that issue has also been being addressed in some of the other surrounding GSAs as well. I'm going to pause right there and ask Deanna if you want to add anything on the annual reports, Deanna. Otherwise, I'm going to jump into my other presentation for today.
Sure. All I'll say is actually the manager meeting and the technical advisory committee meeting for the Tule Subbasin is today. It's afternoon.
Oh, that's right. This afternoon.
and the Tule technical advisory committee meeting at 2:00 is it should be accessible to everybody. If anybody needs a link to that, you can always contact Four Creeks office. They send out the links to those meetings. That's a public meeting and gives an update to what's happening in the subbasin. And I'm probably a little bit ahead of what's going to be said today, but it's my understanding that what the Tule Subbasin intends to do regarding this number that went out that was probably grossly overestimated for change in storage is that we're going to draft a letter and submit it to the department that basically states that we knew there was some sort of anomaly with this number, and we're looking into the data further, and just so that they note that, because I have noted in other subbasins, these change in storage numbers are already being written up in articles, and they're being utilized as if that's, factual data, which is what we're trying to submit. But as we work through these first couple of years, our methodologies in how we're collecting and how we're analyzing data are changing a bit, and it makes us have numbers that are not consistent yet. So that's I think, going to be the intent of the subbasin to explain that a little further, and I think that'll be a good thing, so.
Any questions on that from anyone? All right, not seeing any, so I'm going to keep moving. We have two presentations for you, but I will warn you, in both cases we are expecting a lot of feedback from this group. So the group's been fairly quiet today, but I want to encourage all of you as we get into both these next two items, that we are absolutely looking for a lot of stakeholder feedback, very similar to what we did with the allocation process, and make sure that, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped an agenda item, didn't I? On the Lower Deer Creek, and also, Deanna, I don't know if you wanted to have David or Rusty talking about any of their issues before I jump into these two presentations.
Sure. I'll just say, on the Lower Deer Creek Watershed Plan, I put in a call to Kathy this morning, but I did not hear back from her, and she's not on. So I'm not certain where that is right now. I don't know that they've hired the person that's going to head that up yet. So we'll have to check back next month on a better update on the Lower Deer Creek Watershed Plan, unless somebody online has further information. And if not, I'll let David or Rusty, if you have a quick update on for the group.
David, I think you're still muted. David, I think you're muted. David, I think you're still muted, David.
He's working on it.
Oh, okay.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I can get started while we're waiting for David to get unmuted. 559, that bill that deals with that improving capacity in both the state and federal system by fixing the canals, both the aqueduct as well as the Delta Mendota, in the areas where there's subsidence, passed out of committee unanimously. It's still got a rough road to go. There was a spirited discussion. Bill did move along, and so that's good news. The arguments seem to, go two ways. On one side, people are saying, why should all California taxpayers pay for this? When the beneficiaries are, largely the agriculture people, who some of them are responsible for the subsidence. The other side argues that this is a perfect one-time expense. It's not an ongoing cost, that most Californians would benefit from it, and that it's a good expenditure for the surplus that we have. And then there was about, the state paying for improvements on the federal system back and forth. This bill gone. There are a lot of pots of money floating around out there at the federal and state level. So, I believe it's going to get done. The only question is how and who's going to pay for it. The other issue we have coming up, and I know Deanna's been working on it, is our discussion with Wade Crowfoot and the state parks director, with the Allensworth community people tomorrow. And hopefully we can assist them in getting some funding. When I brought this up to the resources secretary, he was very, very, excited about it and kind of moved it to the front of the line. So I think the Allensworth people are really excited to have an opportunity to talk to somebody who could really help them get something done. Deanna, I don't know if you want to.
No, and I want to thank you, both Rusty and David, for securing that conversation. I'm guessing it's still set for May 4th at 2. I have that on the calendar. I've contacted everybody, and we're going to have the pre-meeting tomorrow morning. So I'm excited about it, and I'm excited, and I see that Coyote's on the line, and we're working together, and Denise and Coyote have given me a list of people to include, and I've included them. So we'll have a robust pre-meeting tomorrow, and we'll be prepared to come next week. So thank you again for securing that meeting for us.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to that. And I apologize that I'm unavailable tomorrow morning. But I know Rusty plans on being on. And thanks to Rusty for getting the secretary very enthusiastic about this meeting.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thank you, Rusty. Thank you, David. All right. In that case, again, I'm going to jump into my presentations. As I said, we've got a lot to cover, so we want to make sure there's enough. And I'm going to just share screens here, so bear with me for a second. Okay. I'm assuming you can all see that okay?
Yes.
All right. All right. So let me get started. There's two items that we're going to discuss today. One is a quick summary of the Lower Blue River and Pixley GSA's water accounting and water transfers policies. If you remember from our last meeting, we had a very preliminary discussion about some of the projects. And then one of the questions that came up, of course, is what type of credits would I get if I was as a proponent for one of the projects, and if we were to implement a project, what kind of credits would there be? And that obviously led to a bigger issue then of what kind of water transfer policies we would have. So rather than start from scratch, what I wanted to do today was take this initial half of the presentation, give you a summary, which some of you may already be familiar with, of what Lower Tule and Pixley are doing. And that's going to probably prompt us to have some good discussion on how some of those items may or may not apply to Tri-County, and what we can do to maybe use that as a starting point for what we're going to implement in Tri-County. So I think this will be a good discussion. Looking for a lot of input from the stakeholders. And very similar ideas. So the second half of the presentation is going to then be a very rough ideas and initial thoughts of what we're thinking about for potentially a land fallowing program. We want to make sure that we're incentivizing certain types of actions in helping to achieve sustainability. So we want to maybe think about potentially some type of land fallowing, and it should be land fallowing and retirement program. There are, two parts to this. So in both cases here, I'm going to hope that I get a lot of feedback from the group and leave you with something to think about and continue this discussion over our next few meetings as well. So this is a summary of the Lower Tule program. So keep in mind, it uses their terminology. First thing they did in this policy was identify their groundwater credit inputs. For us, as you heard already from the folks from Four Creeks, the first thing would be, of course, we have a sustainable yield for Tri. And then we also have our, landowner developed credits and other credits that we've allocated in our allocation policy. And then the third thing, or the third item, of course, for us would be the transitional pumping. So they, Tule or excuse me, let's try that again. The Tule River and Pixley have this set up a little bit differently, but essentially what we would do is identify what our groundwater input and credits would be. And then this is where we start talking about transfer. So the first one, of course, is what do you do if you can transfer within the GSA? Everything they talk about on transfers, they base it on land base. So that means, you know, a certain parcel, how much is that parcel credits, and which parcel is going to, would we credit, and which parcel would we, all based on an individual parcel level rather than on a landowner. You know, as it says, that the credits would be transferred only by landowners who have a positive balance in their groundwater budget. Obviously, they don't allow anyone to go negative. That seems like a good and reasonable expectation. And then what they don't do is anyone who transfers credits out of their account, they don't allow for the use of the transitional groundwater credits for that year. And that's probably different than I think is going to be likely in Tri-County, since we've made sure that the transitional groundwater credits for this year, or for everyone who's allocated transitional, is to the irrigated lands and the lands that are actually in production. So I think that may be something that would be different in Tri-County as opposed to what, and again, these are my initial thoughts. I'm absolutely looking forward to getting some of your guys' thoughts. And by the way, please feel free to jump in if you have any questions along the way. You want to raise your hand and ask any questions. I'll let Stacy keep an eye out for anyone who might have some questions. One of the things that they do, of course, is a one-to-one credit. So regardless of where you're located within the GSA, we may, you know, does that make sense for Tri-County? If you're in the north area, in the southeast area, does that still work for us? Do we want to do a one-to-one, or do we do it more on a one-to-one for a management area? Something to, you know, that again, probably requires a little additional conversation and discussion. They do require that there's a formal notification to the GSA. The GSA would then have to approve that transfer. It would be recorded in the Basin Safe software that you just saw. Basically, what they're asking for is the amount of the credit, and whatever the terms of that sale, lease, whatever it was, you know, that's not the GSA's concern. They're just recording the actual transfer itself. One thing that they don't talk about, and it is something, of course, to keep in mind as we're discussing any kind of water transfers, is a time frame as well. Do we allow, well, you know, 1 year transfers? Do we allow multi-year transfers? And how do you want to handle that situation? So that is probably one of the items that we're going to want to consider as we're getting into a transfer policy. Okay, and then transfer waters outside of the GSA. Again, groundwater credits for them, they allow transfers obviously within the Tule subbasin. They do put the caveat that that whatever GSA you transfer to has to have a similar landowner-based groundwater accounting system as you know, Lower Tule. So our system, and while we're using Basin Safe, we are obviously tracking water a little bit differently. As you saw, you know, they're giving precipitation credits and all kinds of other credits in there that may be slightly different. So this is going to be one of those items where we're going to have this discussion with the other GSA managers and make sure that we all understand how we're going to do this in inter-basin transfers and how are we intra-basin, excuse me, within the Tule subbasin, and how are we going to keep those, make sure that the counting is 1-to-1. They don't allow for any groundwater credits outside of the Tule subbasin. And then the maximum amount of transfers out for a year out, outside of the individual GSAs is limited to 10,000 acre feet. So that's something to keep in mind too. Is that a realistic number? Does it make sense? We are probably pumping about 90,000 plus or minus acre feet across the Tri-County area. In a wet year, since we don't, obviously portions of Tri-County don't get that much surface water, but other GSAs do. Do we want to try and encourage that number to be higher to see if we can move some water and move not water, but water credits into, potentially into Tri-County. So again, I think some of these are very key items that require a lot more discussion. They also have a May 1st deadline for any transfer requests. And that's, again, a very debatable item. Do we want to put a time limit like that for transfers, or do we want to allow transfers to occur throughout the year, throughout the growing season, the water year? And then some administrative and approval items in this policy. As I said before, any groundwater credit transfers require notification and approval of the GSA. There's a $100 transfer fee that is incurred on every transfer. Transfers into certain areas are limited or restricted. So obviously we don't want all of the groundwater pumping to occur in a very small area. So there are going to be some restrictions that the GSA may implement, and those restrictions may change on a year-to-year basis, depending on what we're finding out and what is happening to water levels across the GSA and as time goes by. They're going to review their representative monitoring sites, look at water levels across that, make some decisions on what's happening. All of that sounds pretty reasonable. They have a water commission. Obviously ours would be done by our board. And then they will review this policy annually and reserve any right to make any changes. All of that seems to make sense. So having said that, that is a quick and dirty presentation on the Lower Tule water credit system. And as I've mentioned and said this several times, a lot of this I think is going to be very applicable to Tri-County. In other cases, I think there are some items that we may as a group decide that we want to change. And what I'd like to do is open it up for discussion with all of you and start getting some feedback on both the parts that you liked and thought were items that we should include in our policy, and other items that you think are either need to be changed, or any items that you think are missing from this discussion in this initial policy, and what what we should add to ours. So let me open it up to you guys a little bit, and I'm hoping we prompted some thoughts and ideas and discussions on what you might want to do. And I realize that this is a lot to cover in one meeting. This certainly isn't going to be the only meeting we talk about this, and this is kind of going to be a focus for ours over the next few meetings.
Hey, Amir, this is Molly Thurman. There's some sort of technical substantiation of the 10,000 acre foot transfer limit?
Yeah, that's a good question, Molly. And I've been wondering the same thing, and I have not had that discussion with with either Lower Tule, and I have not asked if that question to Tom Harder. I think, I had a discussion with Deanna yesterday, and I should probably let her answer this a little bit, but in some of our discussion, I know that Lower Tule did ask Tom to run the model with another 10,000 extracted out of Lower Tule and see what kind of negative impacts there might be. So
yeah, that's where that comes from, Amir. What they did is Thomas Harder has been commissioned on the side, not through the Tule Subbasin, but I believe by Pixley and maybe even Eastern Tule to run some scenarios. And it's my understanding that in the scenarios, this 10,000 acre foot cap was what they thought was not going to cause unreasonable and undesirable results. So that's kind of where that's come from, but I don't, and the reason for kind of putting this out there today the way we did is because, one, I want to make certain that whatever policy we draft matches with the rest of the subbasin, and they're in the initial stages, and so is Eastern Tule. I actually received earlier a draft from Eastern Tule of their talking points as well. It's going through their committees. So we're going to start discussions subbasin-wide regarding this policy, and so having feedback from my stakeholders, I think will be important. I don't want to draft a policy that doesn't meet or match with the rest of the subbasin, so that is the intent for kind of coming at this as a soft start rather than a full policy. And here it is. We're just trying to work through it, and as we've found out through this process, every time you put something down and say that's how it's going to be, it seems to get rewritten many times. So we're just in the beginning, I think, of putting this policy together that will mesh with the rest of the subbasin. But that 10,000 did come out of a study that Thomas Harder did for them, and it was very particular to certain zones. And what they found was, one, you didn't want the credit to go to one small area. So if somebody purchased a lot of credit and used that pumping in a very centralized zone, you'd cause cones of depression again or exacerbate problems. So there's a spatial relationship where the water credit transfers have to be spaced a certain distance from each other, and only so much credit in certain areas. And there's a lot to think through and work through in this process, and that's a long answer to your question, but they are doing a little bit of research, and that's where that number came from.
One of the questions that we also talked about, as I mentioned, is does that number make sense in a wet year, and where we've got lots of water and we've got flood water coming down in a very short amount of time? Should there be a distinction for a wet year and in a, let's just call it a normal year, quote unquote? And obviously a limit in a lower number for a normal year makes a lot of sense, but on a wet year, maybe that's something that we need to get some feedback from the stakeholders and say, yeah, that opens up some huge possibilities for all of us if we can get some more water in the wet years.
Yeah, Amir, Steve, let me echo what Molly said too. I know I represent a stakeholder. We're actively looking at some projects in the Tule Basin outside of Tri-County, and so we really need to make sure that we talk across the basin to the managers so that we coordinate here, because I know there's a lot of private investment that's going to happen, but if our hands are tied, it's really going to impact what we are wanting to do. And I think, as you said, I think we got to look at wet years. We got to look at how much can be moved. The water really is faces the water, surface water is in the middle of the basin. Both the west and the east side really, a large parts that don't have surface deliveries. So, I just think this is very important for us as a basin as we look at it, because I think a lot of us are, looking at projects not in Tri-County, but in maybe in Pixley or in Lower Tule to generate credit, and so I just think it's going to be very, very important as we work through this process. It's going to really give us what we can, or I guess at what level we want to invest in projects.
So some of you know, Bob and I are working on a water market strategy for the McMullen area GSA. And we're also pursuing that in the Cahuilla subbasin as well. There's a lot of things to consider as you move into a water market in addition, but one of the things is, as I mentioned, as we were talking about this, is I wanted to get some thoughts on also the timelines. What makes the most sense? Would we be looking at credits on a annual basis? So every year, if I do a credit deal, is it just a one-time deal and it's good for the 1 year? Or because obviously much of the Southeast area in Tri-County is in permanent crop, would we be, more open and willing to do maybe some longer term water credits so that you can kind of plan your business across the, multi-year process? So I wanted to open that up and ask if any of you had any thoughts on that item as well. I was going to ask if I'm muted here, Deanna.
I know, we're missing some people today too. This is a pretty small advisory committee meeting.
Yeah, it's a small group. Yeah, this is a lot to cover, and I know that several of you are hearing. Obviously, all of you are hearing this for the first time. If you haven't looked at Lower Tule's policy in the past, but we really are looking for some input from all of you as to what makes the most sense for Tri-County in terms of a policy. And as Steve said, we want to offer as much flexibility to the landowners while also trying to make sure that we stay in compliance with the rest of the subbasin, so that whatever we're doing, is in coordination with them, and it's one policy that allows you to trade credits across the entire subbasin. And your thoughts and ideas and suggestions are all going to be very important in making sure that we don't want to get what's the right word, railroaded into having to accept Lower Tule's policy. It might work great for them, but if we're going to do something basin wide, we want to make sure that your ideas and thoughts and everything else, as much as possible, get incorporated into that basin wide policy.
Yeah, and I would say that just a little bit. We want to be able to push up some policy too, as we want to make sure to build in flexibility as we're having these discussions around the subbasin. So if you can visualize a project where you see those credits happening, and there's certain parameters that you would like to see in place, then we need to know those so that we can try to advocate for you a little bit as well. And whenever I think of moving water credits, we have to be cautious of some things. We have to make certain that we don't exacerbate or go below the minimum thresholds, and so there's all these little caveats. But before we get into all the things that we can't do, let's try to think big about what we can do, and then funnel those big idea projects into a water market with parameters that make sense for the whole subbasin. So that's the intent.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to leave leave you guys with a couple thoughts because we still have another discussion to go through here. Think about, there's some limits that they did, the 10,000, as Molly mentioned, of total trading. That's something that I think you want to give some thought to. They made it very clear that the GSA has to approve all the trades, and that's an issue that I think is worth some more discussion about. How do you, do we do this more as a open up a platform and you just go in and do a trade, within the certain rules and parameters built in. The other one, of course, is, they made it clear that no water is going to, or credits are going to leave the sub-basin. And, the ancillary of that is also true, and that would be that no water would be coming, or trades would be coming in from other sub-basins. And that may be a bridge too far, maybe initially, but as I mentioned, Kuya is thinking about a market as well. And there may be places where something like this starts to make sense. And certainly if you are a landowner that's on a boundary, you may start to think about, okay, I want to make sure that I can move some credits back and forth, across the GSA line. So that's something to think about. I think all of our initial reaction is to say no to allowing trades across the GSA boundaries, but maybe some flexibility there might make sense. So please think about what what the policy that, this initial thoughts, let's start to get some feedback from you, and we'll start to modify this policy into one that works for Tri-County. All right, Deanna, I'm going to keep moving.
Yep.
The second thing, and this is, again, some very, 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 this is not, I would say this is not even a pre-alpha. This is like a pre-alpha version of this thoughts and ideas on some land fallowing and retirement program. Deanna and I had a conversation the other day. We were thinking about how do we want to look at all of the different ways that we're going to try to provide some incentives to help meet our sustainable goals, for the GSP, and potentially a land fallowing and retirement program is one of those. And in order to do something like this, we're looking at this and going, okay, how do we want to make sure that we're incentivizing the correct type of behaviors that are actually going to help us achieve those goals? So big picture, and with this year with the drought, there's potential for some options may become available to us, and so we're trying to look at all of the potential benefits that we might be able to have if we have a policy in place. A couple things, and this is probably very obvious to all of you, but I just want to make sure that we define a few terms. When I'm talking land fallowing, I am talking very short term. We can decide exactly what short term means, but land would go out of production temporarily and then go back into production at a later date. And then land retirement is exactly what it sounds like. That would be a much more permanent retirement of that land. It would no longer use that water on that land. It would come out of agricultural production. It could be used for other purposes. That's fine. We would obviously want to make sure that whatever water use that occurs on that land in the future is accounted for. But the idea is to take it permanently out of production. And as I said, this is a working draft. So just some thoughts as we're looking at it. So land fallowing, maybe we're looking at 1 year increments with a maximum limit. Maybe we would say, okay, you can fallow land for 3 years under this program. There would be some type of compensation and incentive for fallowing that land. Incentives are usually either obviously some kind of compensation for that, cash payment, or it would be some additional water credits. And most likely water credits are going to be difficult of the situation that we're in Tri-County. So in my initial thoughts, I was kind of leaning more towards annual payments, exactly what those would be and how much, we as a group kind of need to figure out as we're putting a more formal policy together. And then the other item to consider in a land fallowing is continuing to transfer those water credits. So I fallow my land, I receive some type of compensation for that. And then I am still allowed to transfer those sustainable yield and any transitional water credits up to a point. So we would want to, take all of that into consideration. We want to incentivize people to fallow land in the dry years, but we also want to figure out a way that makes sense to actually reduce our overall groundwater pumping for that year as well. So some thoughts and ideas on maybe how we can, what value is it, and we're going to allow you to transfer the entire amount? Should we, as a group, allow the transfer of the entire water credit if you're fallowing and receiving a compensation for that? Or is it some reduced amount? Is it only the sustainable yield and not the transitional pumping if you enter into this program? Some thoughts and ideas, and that's kind of where we're looking at, for some feedback and some of your thoughts. And then on a land retirement basis, as I said, this is a permanent retirement, at least irrigated agriculture, and we want to take into account that water would then be used elsewhere, or and as that transitional value decreases, the GSA will see that savings as well. There would be a one-time payment for that land retirement. That's at least my initial thoughts. Obviously, that number would likely be very different than a fallowing program. So we want to try and consider that and see what makes sense, on a per acre basis for permanent land retirement. And then again, the same questions about water credits and the transfers of those. Do we look at that and say, yeah, certainly the sustainable yield makes sense. I think in both cases, in my mind at least, this is, being able to transfer the sustainable yield certainly makes sense. The question comes in is on the transitional pumping. Is that a one-to-one value if you enter into either of these two programs? Our water allocation policy certainly, says that you don't lose that transitional pumping over time, and then the question just becomes is if we prepare this program, what actually, with the other types of compensation in there, is that transitional pumping still at a one-to-one value? All right. So, having said that, that opens it up for some discussion and some ideas and some thoughts from all of you. Do you want, the GSA to continue to pursue this policy? So that's one idea, one question that we have for you. And then your thoughts and ideas on both the land fallowing as well as the land retirement.
Hey, Mayor, I'd probably add just a couple of additional thoughts on your presentation there. One being, I think the definitions of fallow could also be refined a little bit.
Sure.
We talked yesterday that managed fallow land might be different than unmanaged fallow land. If there's some activity, it's getting disked or something, it could actually increase its capacity to recharge and So that type of fallowing might be treated differently than something that you're just letting revert to some sort of natural state. I don't know. We may want to consider not calling it permanent just because I think that implies some potentially difficult legal sort of agreements on what is permanent. So maybe it just becomes more of a long-term thing. You know, it's a 5-year agreement that gets revisited every time the GSP is updated or something. I don't know, but permanent might not be the right term. And then I think we should also be thinking about when these incentives are in place, because in some instances you may want to incentivize fallowing during wetter years, so that you're excuse me, you're increasing the recharge. You know, fallowing during dry years reduces demand, but fallowing during wet years could increase the recharge. So there's kind of a, in the way you handle the incentives in those different year types could be different as well, either whether it's cash or water credits. So I think those are some other wrinkles that would need to be factored into the fallowing program. And again, you want to make it as much of a carrot as possible and not as much of a stick. But I think you can present some of the carrots in perspective to the sticks, you know, in terms of penalties for exceeding sustainable yield compared to incentives for managing your fallow land. So those are just a few things that came to mind looking at those slides.
Thank you, Bob. You know, and in my mind, when I think of a land retirement, I think it's possible we might be able to marry that with, you know, a one-time payment to take the land out of production, but then with some conservation. So one of the government programs for conservation, so that you have ongoing conservation easement payments or something to that effect. So maybe there's, you know, it's a dual, we can marry a couple of those programs together. And I don't know particularly if there's one out there right now that works with that, but I know that I believe the EDF and some other groups are looking at land repurposing and how that would look. And so I think there will be some funding out there that could possibly be married with any program that we also come up with and would fund as well.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with are there folks that are using the CREP program in Thule?
I don't know is my answer. I'm not certain.
That might be something to just do a little research on, Amir, just to see if that program is active. I know it's pretty popular in the Midwest, but I don't really know in San Joaquin.
Which program did you say, Bob?
It's I think it's a USDA program called the CREP program, Conservation Resource. I don't remember what the E and the P stand for, but you know, it's essentially putting parts of your land into conservation, and I think it's often used as water quality protection in the Midwest. But I'm really not familiar with its popularity or use in California.
Yeah. No, I'm not familiar with the use of that much, but I think to Deanna's point, I think we need to look at this globally and look outside of our areas, and you look at some of the environmental groups, because we are looking at the retirement down the road. And I think if we can help, you know, financially, legislatively, smart retirement. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff to think about. But I think, sadly, one of these things that we are looking at the GSA is how do we go through this potential retirement. And I do like the point about permanent. I think we need to change the terminology a little bit, Bob, but not sure how best to sugarcoat it right now.
thoughts and any feedback from the group on the stakeholders?
With the following language, the permanent, isn't there a number of years that once land is out of production, it falls out of the ag category? If we don't
so-
readily know that, I'll look it up, but I want to be sure that if we include something, we don't accidentally dupe landowners into like fouling for 5 years if the rule is 4 before you fall out of the ag category.
So are you talking about like in the Williamson Act, Molly?
I think so. I can't put my head on it right now, but there is something. It might be for prime farmland only. I don't remember.
Yeah, I think prime farmland under Williamson has to be used every 5 years somehow. But I don't know if there are other classifications. There may be some. I don't know if Tulare County has something else that they use, but that's a good point.
Yeah, I agree. That we
Yeah.
definitely don't want to do something inadvertent or have some secondary consequences to the landowners.
Well, or to the county, you know, if
or to the county, right.
So that the county might have some interest in some of these definitions as well. So maybe they
I know
become.
talking to the county supervisors in Tulare and King, that this is definitely on their minds, to what's going to happen to their tax base too.
Yeah.
So I think that's another point that we need to engage at the GSA board level with the county board of supervisors as we walk through this potential retirement discussion, you know. And but just with Molly's point, with that, the ramifications are they'll ripple quite far.
Yeah.
Right. Do you, let me ask this to the group. So just the basic question about, having this type of a policy. I realize the devil's in the details, but is this something that you guys feel that the GSA should continue to pursue? Is this especially in conjunction with some, this is a corollary discussion because the water credit issue that we talked about as well, they're kind of related in that sense. They both would affect water credits.
Mayor, just so you're not talking to your computer screen, I need to go through these
I appreciate
policies.
that.
Yeah, I will reiterate, what Steve has already said, and you put the word flexibility, and Deanna said the same. I think we certainly should strive for flexibility for landowners for survival purposes, and survival might be a little dramatic, but in saying flexibility and then not having some examples for you, I realize we set you with really nothing to work on, but examples or finer points, at least on my end, kind of warrant deeper thought and maybe more discussion of or examples for you. So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask, is there a date that you would like some greater, detailed discussion from me? Set some time aside and really think about what does flexibility mean for my assets and a policy.
I don't think we're trying to put a firm date just yet, Molly, because some of these are, like I said, very initial thoughts that we haven't even put together our initial thoughts on a policy as well. And so I would encourage you between now and in our May 26th meeting, if you have some thoughts and ideas that you would like to see, at least in the first cut of the policy, to get those to Deanna. And we'll make sure that we consider all of that as we're putting together our first cut. Today was kind of an introduction. By the 26th, maybe we'll have a little bit more meat on the bones, and we'll be doing some thinking along the same lines about how to offer you as much flexibility as we can, as well as a GSA. And then, there's some obvious questions about, I've mentioned the word compensation several times, and you're all going to be curious, any landowner's going to be curious as to what those numbers are and how they were derived, of course.
The other thing is that, fallowing, if you go down the road of a water market, fallowing will be tied into that. It has to be, because if someone's going to generate credits that they want to sell on the market by fallowing land, then somehow the market needs to confirm that the land has been fallowed. So, the mechanism, it may not be as much of a policy for the board as a rule in the market on how fallowed credits are used or traded in the market and verified as a bona fide credit. So, you could consider something that isn't as policy oriented and more market based.
Right.
It's how you generate the credit to put in the market.
And in some respects, we're trying to gauge the interest so that, if we're going to put together a full policy and do some of the studies on what that would take and what payments will look like, that's a pretty big undertaking. I think that I have interest from some of my landowners, so we've been moving it forward. And then on the fallowing program, I have some indication from the department that they, because of the drought and the emergency drought situation, they might be bringing forth a program that would be immediate type of program, and they might be looking at fallowing of some sort and or mitigation for domestic wells. They don't really know, but they do know that we're facing drought conditions, and they're looking at something that might help us. So Tri-County, fortunate or unfortunate, we have quite a bit that's already fallow. We don't have a lot of row crops, easily fallowed crops. So I'm not sure if one of those programs came forth, it would be super helpful to most of my stakeholders. But that said, we're just trying to think through some of this and be prepared if funds become available.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Deanna, in the interest of time, I realize I'm about 3 minutes over our meeting time here, but that was the two big items that we had. The item number 5 on the agenda there is a introduction into discussion on the CV2 sim modeling. And I didn't know if you wanted to go ahead and get into that now, or save that for the board meeting on next week, which is the 6th, I believe.
Did you have something specific data that came out of that, or just a discussion for the board pretty much on what we intend to do with the CV2?
It was more of a discussion on what we intend to do. Bob did put together a small presentation, but we can certainly, in the interest of time, save that for the board meeting next week.
Okay, that works for me. I do have a question though. I saw someplace it's C2VSIM, and in some places it's CV2SIM. Which one is it?
It's C2VSIM.
C2VSIM, okay. I saw it the other day, and I had been saying CV2SIM, so
right.
I'm going to correct myself.
I wrote it incorrectly on here as well.
Sounds good. Well, thanks everybody. We had not very many today. There must be something very interesting happening, and maybe it's that current groundwater. Was that still happening? No? So we're kind of short on people, but we will have something hopefully of value in the next meeting, and we will see you in 1 month. Do you have the date of that? May 26th? May 26th, and that would be the 4th Wednesday coming into Memorial Weekend. So, yeah. But that's all right. It's still a good work day. So we will have the next meeting on May 26th at 10 a.m.
And Molly, I was going to tell you a quick. I heard the baby there. Congratulations on that.
Yes.
So good to see you're back in it. And congrats again to you.
Thanks.
Just FYI for those on, Kathy sent me a message, and she said they're still advertising for the position for the watershed coordinator. So that's where that is. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. See ya.